Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. You know, Billy, I'm really excited about today's presentations because one, Dr. Ellen Crocker had a Forest Health Conference, and I saw a version of this presentation that we're going to see today, and it's amazing. So, and obviously, you know, Dr. Crocker is too. So we've got two amazing people on today.
We do. Renee, it's great to be with you today, and welcome everybody to From the Woods Today. Glad to have you all with us. As Renee said, we've got a really exciting show. We've got a first timer, which, you know, I always love bringing in first time guests. And not only is this a first timer, but this is a really solid first timer, right? And he's going to be talking about something that if you look out your windows and you're in any kind of urban area in Kentucky, there's a good chance you're going to be seeing what he's going to be talking about. So we're going to have Dr. David Coyle with the University of Clemson with us. He's a forest health and invasive species extension specialist, professor, much like Dr. Ellen Crocker does here in Kentucky. He handles that stuff in South Carolina for the University of Clemson. But yeah, he's a dynamic, great speaker, and we're really excited to have him with us. But we will start off the show today with Dr. Ellen Crocker with another edition of her What's Bugging My Tree. So it's always great to have Dr. Crocker with us. And Dr. Crocker, we're coming strong on forest health stuff today. And
yes,
we are. Yeah. That's what I like to see.
We appreciate you being on.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about today. I know you've got a video. What's it about?
We've got a short video for you about it because it's something that, for whatever reason, I've been receiving more questions about, and I thought it might be a good thing to bring up, perhaps because our trees are blooming and just starting to leaf out, and you might notice some of the things happening on their trunks a little bit more this time of year, and wondering, it's a good time to scout and look at your trees and think about how are they doing, what's going on. And we should always be on the lookout for damage. And this is one that I get questions about. What are those holes in my tree? Is this a insect? What's happening? But we're going to talk about sapsucker damage, which, looks like holes in your tree and could be confused with insect damage. But these are holes that are going to be in straight lines and are actually being caused by birds. So learning a little bit more about that, what it is, what causes it. So
awesome. Well, remind our viewers and listeners, if you are with us live today, hit us up via the chat and we can address those questions. If you're a podcast listener or a YouTuber, hit us up via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu and we can respond that way. But Dr. Crocker, so excited to have you on today and our big focus on forest health. Love it.
All right, let's go ahead and get started watching that video.
Holes in your tree's trunk can be a cause for concern, but if you're seeing holes in a straight line, you're probably seeing sapsucker damage. In this edition of What's Bugging My Tree, we'll talk a little bit about sapsucker damage, what causes it, and what you can do about it. Sapsuckers use their beaks to peck holes in trees. These tend to be pretty small and shallow, and they're in a really distinctive pattern. They're going to be in a straight, orderly line most of the time. Most of the time this is horizontal, but sometimes it can also be vertical. After pecking these holes, the bird will then lap the sap that flows out of them with its tongue and drink that. This is very different from the type of holes that would be caused by insects. Whenever I get an email about a maple tree with holes in it, I'm relieved to see that it's sapsucker damage, that it's holes in a clear line, instead of something more damaging like the Asian longhorn beetle, which would have holes that are in no clear pattern but large holes and can really damage trees rapidly. It's an invasive we don't want to see here. Favorite tree species of sapsuckers are anything that has sweet sap and thin bark. Just like we enjoy maple trees for their syrup, sapsuckers do as well, but they also will feed on a wide range of different tree species, from birch and elm to sweet gum and even yellow poplar and many other species. In addition, lots of other things can be attracted to the sticky sap that's produced when these sapsuckers peck into trees, whether it's other wildlife or insects, or even the sooty black mold that you'll see on the side of trees. If you're seeing this damage in the eastern US, it was probably caused by a yellow-bellied sapsucker. It's a species of woodpecker that's common throughout this region and migrates, spending its winters further south and moving north in the summers. There are actually 3 other species of sapsucker, but these are native to the western part of the US. Sapsuckers have a sweet tooth, and they use their beaks to poke holes in trees and then their tongues to lap up the sap that flows from those holes. The yellow-bellied sapsucker has a red crown and, as its name implies, a somewhat yellow-colored belly. However, that can be hard to see, in part because it's not a very bright color yellow, but also because these birds will spend their time clinging to trees, hopping up and down them, with their bellies pressed to those trunks. Sapsuckers are a type of woodpecker, and there are other woodpeckers out there. Most of these don't eat the sap, but are actually eating insects inside of those trees. So when they're digging around in trees, what they're looking for is larvae. If you're seeing larger holes, that might be what they are. In addition, they might make larger holes for nests. We've seen a lot of this after the arrival of emerald ash borer, where you have ash trees that have lots of larvae in them, and you have woodpeckers and other wildlife that are trying to eat them. The yellow-bellied sapsucker is a native bird, not an invasive species and a normal part of our systems. In general, we love wildlife, we love bird watching, but the yellow-bellied sapsucker can really try your patience, especially if it's feeding on a valued landscape tree. Most of the time, they don't cause much damage, and it's a relatively minor issue. But sometimes, if there's a lot of damage, and sometimes birds do favor particular trees for whatever reason, it can seriously impact the health of those trees. However, these are protected species, they're migratory birds, so even if you wanted to do something to them, you can't. Instead, a better strategy is to discourage them from feeding or to scare them off if they come. You can cover valued tree trunks with burlap or different meshes, and there are different kind of tools to help you scare off birds, whether it's hanging reflective items in those trees or other repellents. While this is possible in some cases, it's certainly not feasible in all, and not something that you could do across a large number of trees. In general, while those birds don't damage the tree too much, they do create wounds that are perfect entry points for decay, fungi, and other issues. So promoting the health of your tree can go a long way towards giving them the ability to fight back anything that might enter through those wounds. In general, sapsuckers aren't a major concern for the health of your tree, and a better option might be to sit back and enjoy the wildlife. Thanks for joining me today and learning a little bit more about sapsucker damage. If you'd like to learn more, make sure to check us out online and follow us on social media.
Awesome. As always, great job, Dr. Crocker. We really appreciate you doing that.
Well, thank you. And if that looked familiar to you, these are really common things. I will see damage like that on trees and yards, trees in the woods, and a lot of different places. And while on small trees, they can cause substantial damage and be associated with decline, in general, I'd much rather see that than see some other extensive insect damage, which in my mind is a sign of something much worse.
Yeah.
Definitely. Now, will that cause, by them pecking on that tree, will that cause insects to come more to that tree than normal?
It certainly could, especially, you'll see insects that are attracted to that weeping sap, a whole set of them in sooty mold, maybe as well. Like if you see a tree with a black trunk, that could be because either an insect or maybe a bird was causing some of that. And later, you've got a lot of wounds on your tree, which again, a large tree, a healthy tree should be able to tolerate, but it's a great entry point for decay fungi. It can make trees more attractive to other damage from insects. So not, the
Not
perfect
ideal.
thing for your tree, not ideal, but not as serious of a concern as a lot of people think. While it certainly could cause serious damage, and if you had a whole lot of it, sometimes they pick favorite trees. and they just go back to this tree over and over again. Maybe that could cause tree death. At the same time, in most cases, it doesn't. I have, for whatever reason, a tree that I never would have thought would be attracted to it. In my neighborhood, I have a yellow poplar or tulip tree. If you've ever smelled the wood of those trees, it does not smell good. It does not smell like a delicious tree that one would want to suck the sap out of. But for whatever reason, they love it. And every inch of that thing is covered with holes. So, they pick their favorites, but that tree is still doing great and has no apparent problems from it. Now, I am curious, our other speaker today, Dave Coyle, we're happy to have him on. You also see this down in South Carolina, I bet. I'm guessing.
Hey,
Well,
everybody. Yeah, we see sapsuckers all the time. We see it most often probably in landscape trees, kind of like you were saying, Ellen. Maples get hit, a lot of red maples in this part of the world, but they don't, they've got favorite individual trees, but I don't know that they have favorite species. Not that I can tell. They're pretty generalist.
I was curious. I have a holly that they took out of my landscape. They kind of girdled it. It was a small holly, but yeah. So I was curious about that. Yeah, if there was like certain species they like more than others. Or...
Right, and as Ellen and I were talking earlier, sometimes they'll make their little holes in horizontal rows, and sometimes they'll go vertical. We've read that sometimes they're testing the waters with the vertical, but who knows? I think the take-home point is I have personally never seen a tree die from sapsucker damage. It almost always seems to heal over and does fine. I don't know about y'all though.
Yeah, maybe occasionally,
Other than
but in general,
Other
yeah,
than
your holly.
Right,
Billy's holly.
Well, it had kind of killed the top of it, so we decided to remove it from the landscape. So,
Oh, okay.
but no.
Yeah, well, I did get some emails from viewers before this about what a cool bird yellow-bellied sapsuckers are, and what a neat species to be able to see. So to each their own. One person's frustrating nemesis is going to be another's like bird that they can't wait to see, and maybe we'll have to talk about them on a future episode.
There you go. That sounds great.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Crocker. Appreciate you very much and all you do for us here.
Thanks. Great to be on, and great to have you on today, Dave.
Thanks, Ellen.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Welcome, Dr. Coyle. So glad to have you on From the Woods today.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Good to see you again. So I've heard lots about this, so I'm excited to be a first-time attendee. So
yeah, we
Billy gets excited over first-timers. So
I could tell earlier. I was like, "Oh, they're talking about me."
We're trying to grow the audience and share the information as wide as possible. So appreciate you bringing some South Carolina flair to us and from the University of Clemson.
And like I said, we couldn't have picked a better time because these trees are blooming everywhere.
Yes.
I know it's in my backyard that it was snowing this weekend. So because of all of the blooms coming from my neighbor's trees. So yes. So if you want to go ahead and start your presentation, we would appreciate it. We're really looking forward to it.
Yeah, the timing couldn't be better. They are absolutely popping out there right now. So
awesome.
Well, let's get cranking then. Are you ready for me?
Yes, sir. Hit it.
All right, we'll get cranking. Hey, everybody. Welcome to From the Woods today. My name is Dave Coyle. As they mentioned, I'm at Clemson University of Forest Health and Invasive Species Extension Specialist, similar job to Dr. Crocker, who we talked about to earlier as well. So today, we will talk about what I believe is the worst tree ever, the Bradford and/or Callery Pear. So I've entitled this talk, Managing Callery Pear in Unmanaged Areas. But if we're being honest, it's really just managing this thing anywhere because it kind of all melts together. So before we go ahead, a disclaimer, I'm going to give you lots of good, solid, peer-reviewed knowledge, but I've also been working with this tree for quite some time, and I have opinions, and you will hear some of those opinions, but I will definitely tell you when that is an opinion and when it is based in fact. So first, let's talk about the tree in general. Pyrus calleriana is the species of this tree that is blooming white everywhere. And this is what most people think of when they say Bradford or even Callery Pear for people. Yes, I will give you, it can be a very pretty tree, shaped like a lollipop, works pretty well in the landscape in some respects. But also if you've smelled them, and I've heard some people can't smell them quite as well as others, but they have a very particular smell, and there's lots of great descriptions out there. This particular one is my favorite. It smells like rotting fish and semen. That's Business Insider in 2013. Still the most colorful description of the scent of these trees I could think of. So before we get into just all of this, there's always an origin story for any evil thing in a story, right? There's an origin story. So let's talk about this one. So back in the late 1800s, 1890s or so, there was a growing demand for crops here in the US. In the Western US, they were working on pears, pear trees from the European pear. And there was actually a part of the USDA whose job was strictly to bring in plants from other places of the world, other parts of the world, to see if we could use them. It was called the USDA Foreign Seed and Plant Introduction Office, and its mission: locate and import economically important plants from around the world. Now, I'm sure that Dr. Crocker and all the folks on the show have talked about invasive species and how we get them, and to read that importing things like that was actually their job is mind-blowing at this point in time. But remember, this is over 100 years ago, and it probably seemed like a good idea. And again, they made lots of material, lots of information on how to get living things from continent to continent. So in the early 1900s, as they were working on this burgeoning pear industry, they had orchards of the edible pear, which is, again, the European pear, Pyrus communis. So this is the one that makes the pears, the fruits that we can eat. And there was a fire blight issue in a lot of these orchards. Fire blight is this bacterial disease, and it affects the leaves and fruit. You can see them here. They're sort of shriveled and dark and dead. It kind of kills the tip of that tree. And they're spread by pollinators, which is unfortunate because you need pollinators to actually make fruit on these trees. So it was kind of this catch-22 circle. What they learned was that there was a type of Pyrus Calleriana, that was native to China that was pretty resistant to fire blight. And so they wanted to test this as a rootstock. And so they sent this fellow, Ernest Wilson, was the first one to bring a bunch of selections of Pyrus Calleriana to North America. After Ernest Wilson, Frank Meyer started doing this. Now, Frank is a very famous, back in the day, famous plant collector. Essentially, what makes you a famous plant collector from this part, this time, remember, to travel over there, you're going by boat, you're hiking, you're not just hopping on Delta and renting something from Enterprise, right? It's a very arduous journey, and surviving it is more or less what made you sort of famous. But he brought over so many things, and really a lot of good. We've named a lot of things after him. The Meyer lemon is named after Frank Meyer. There's several other things. There's medals for some of these societies. So he collected Pyrus Calleriana for 2 to 3 years, and he sent back thousands of pounds of fruit. 100 pounds of seed is what we got out of it. It was actually 20,000 pounds of fruit. In a really kind of dark twist in this whole story, he died collecting Pyrus Calleriana back in 1918. All that said, the stuff that he got back to the US helped save the edible pear industry we had here. So the way they did that is they grafted, and this is a common technique with a lot of fruit trees and some of the other horticultural trees too, but fruits especially. You take a scion or a growing part of a tree above ground, and then you graft it into rootstock. So you sort of cut a slit, you put that thing together, you tape it up, and the tree grows as one. And so the resistance from the roots to that fire blight is brought up into the top of the tree, and you have the top of the tree that produces fruit with the resistance from the rootstock, and then you've got your resistant fruit-producing tree. This is essentially how Bradford pear came to be, okay? So we had a bunch of Pyrus Calleriana outplantings planted. He brought all these seed. We had to put them in the ground. So they're in there just growing, waiting to be used. And at that time, the fella in charge of this plant introduction station, basically a big USDA facility, was John Creech. And there's all these Pyrus Calleriana growing around. And he noticed that some of them might be really good from a horticultural perspective. Disease resistant, drought resistant, pollution resistant. And there was one in particular that didn't have thorns. All the rest of them had thorns. It was very pretty, shaped like a lollipop, pretty white foliage in the spring, pretty red foliage in the fall. I should say white flowers in the spring, red foliage in the fall. And holy cow, you can't kill the thing. And he thought, this is the perfect landscape tree for people that maybe don't have the greenest of thumbs, but they still want something pretty. So what he did was name it the Bradford cultivar after the former station director. And this is John Creech, just before he passed away in North Carolina. Likely the only Callery Pear apologists we have, or Bradford Pear apologists we have. And I like to joke that Bradford is probably rolling over in his grave somewhere with everyone dragging his name through the mud, thinking, I didn't do anything. This was named after me, right? So John Creech is the guy who gave us the Bradford pear. And so to understand, partially why we have the Bradford pear problem we do, we need to understand that it is also a grafted cultivar, kind of like we did with the edible fruit pears. You've got the scions of the Bradford from that one tree that had all those good characteristics we wanted. And then they were grafted onto different Pyrus calleriana rootstocks. So any Bradford pear, or for that matter, any cultivar of flowering pear, it's all Pyrus calleriana, but the roots are often going to be different than whatever the top is. Okay, different individual parts of the tree. And you can see this when you look at sort of Bradford versus wild Callery pear characteristics. So I've got here a branch from a Bradford pear up top, and then here's your Callery pear. Callery pear has thorns, lots and lots of really sharp thorns. And we'll get back to these a little bit. But this is probably the first thing that folks notice with Bradford versus Callery pear. There's some differences in how they look when they're growing, but this is the easiest way to tell, is that a pure Bradford pear or is that just something wild? It's the presence of thorns. Anyway, jumping back, they commercially released Bradford pear around 1961, early 1960s, and it started selling like hotcakes. Everybody wanted these things. In what should have been a really huge red flag, but was not, they noticed that it escaped cultivation in the mid-60s in a couple places, right? So all of a sudden, you've got what looks like Bradford pears growing in places where they were not planted. Seems odd, right? But they were selling so much, they just sort of ignored that. They did notice that in the 80s, when a lot of trees were getting to be 20-ish years old, there were some structural problems. But again, so many of these were being sold, they just kind of kept going. And what they did was keep creating these new cultivars to try to make up for the issues of previous cultivars, right? So if a previous cultivar was breaking too much, they would try to make a new cultivar with better branch angles. None of that really worked, because I think one of the things Bradford pear or any of their flowering pears is most famous for is breaking, right? So it's well known and has been well known that between 20, 25, and 30 years old, these things will break. They will break in the wind. I mean, I could talk for an hour and just show you pictures of Bradford pear trees people put online. They break in the wind, they break in the rain, they break from ice, they break from, if you look at them wrong, these things are going to fall apart. And this is one of my favorite quotes I've seen: a good fart will snap one of these. That's basically how weak they are, because they've got these really, really, really tight branch angles. On top of that, Bradford pear was initially sold and promoted as being sterile, which is, it's true, but it's kind of not all the story, right? It's if your kid only tells you just what you need to know, not the whole story. So you're kind of lying by omission sometimes. If all you have are Bradford pears in an area, then those Bradford pears are the same. All the flowers are the same genetic material, because it's just a clone, basically, right? And they can't make viable seeds if it's just all the same thing. It just takes one other Pyrus to be able to create the pollen that makes the seeds for all of these things that will fertilize these. So this is the example I give. If you've got a neighborhood isolated from everything else, and the only trees in that neighborhood are Bradford pears, you won't have any viable seeds, right? Because all that pollen is the same genetic material, more or less. But if you have one guy, that one neighbor that plants a different cultivar, all of a sudden, pollen from that one can pollinate all those other Bradford pear flowers, and all of those fruits become viable. All the seeds in those fruits become viable. And you see this a lot of times when you've got Bradfords that might sprout from the root stump, which is what you see in both of these pictures, to where you have one tree, but you've got two shoots, two stems coming. One of those stems was the grafted one that was put on there. Another is coming up from the roots. So you can see on the one on the left, you've got one stem on that tree is fully leafed out, where the other one is just starting to break bud. And on the right, you've got one half of that tree, one stem is in full flower when the other's already done flowering and already put leaves on already. So you've got these kind of Franken-tree things going on. This was known. Their response was just kind of to throw their hands up, because my gosh, this tree was selling so much and making so much money, and it was a huge, huge, huge part of the horticultural industry. So now that we know what they make, let's talk a little bit about, well, how many seeds can they make? Because this all sort of contributes to why, when you look out, as Billy said, you look out your window, there's white flowers everywhere. This is part of the reason why. So this is one of my I call this one of my little COVID projects in spring of 2020 when I just needed 2 hours outside of the house because the kids were home. And I asked my wife, I said, just give me 2 hours. I got to just get here for a minute. And I went to this tree down the road and I picked this particular branch. This is a great big mature Callery Pear tree just on the side of the road. Here is that branch, and you can see it. It was about, about the size of my arm or so. I peeled all the leaves off it. And so this was what we have in terms of the fruit. Remember, this is just that one branch from that huge tree. It was about 42 inches long, if I remember right. And on just that chunk of branch, there were 200 live fruits, only 12 dead. And keep in mind, each fruit has 3 to 5 seeds inside it. So you're looking at in a 2.5 foot long, 3 foot long chunk of tree, you've got almost 1,000 possible seeds just there. And again, that was just part of a great big, huge tree itself. So the rate at which these things can make seed, and again, they're going to get eaten by birds, spread as they go. They're going to be eaten by raccoons and possums and deer in some cases, and spread all over the place. The seed production potential is off the charts for these things. And this is mostly why we have wild Callery pear everywhere now. We've got it in old fields. You can see it popping up here. Along the roadsides, right? Almost all the white trees you're going to see now are going to be Callery pear. There's a few species that also have white flowers, but they've got a very different look to them. And we're happy to talk about those when we're done. Unsold lots, especially in urban areas where there's a lot of development, you'll see these. We're seeing these into forests. We have some, lots of just straight pine forests down here in this part of the world. And this whole green understory is Callery pear trees that have sprouted up, and they get burned off every couple of years, but then they just resprout again. And then we see them in pastures as well. All these trees sprouting up in the middle of this horse pasture are Callery pear trees. We have this map on EdMaps right now to show where Callery pear is. It's very incomplete. I think it's probably more appropriate to say, look at the future range. And that's probably more close to where these things are on the landscape. Any aerial shot right now, they will really pop. You'll see these white trees just popping. And there have been some attempts to quantify how much is out there. It's so many Callery pears are out there. To that end, we have just started working with the University of Georgia, and we want to fill in that map you just saw. We want to fill in all the map. Every county that has a Callery pear, we would love it if we could get that thing filled in. So there's this invasivepearwatch.org. We're asking folks, submit your sightings of Callery pear so we can better fill in and know where Callery pear is. Because anytime we do anything regulatory wise, the first question is, how bad of a problem is it and where is it located? And this is going to fill in one of those, help us answer one of those real good questions. Anyway, moving on, who cares, right? When I first moved to South Carolina a long time ago, and my mom visited, and I was trying to tell her these trees are the worst. And she said, well, who cares, David? They're absolutely beautiful. I said, okay, I get that, right? So yes, they are pretty, but thorns, right? So they've got these really hard thorns. These we'll talk about in a minute. Then they do lots more than just poke people, okay? So what are the impacts and why is Pyrus calleriana the worst tree? So let's start here. We see this scene all over the place, from North Florida all the way up through the Northeast, going over to the Great Plains. One of my former students, Shawani, did a bunch of work on this in the genetic realm. And essentially, if you think of what is the most perfect, ideal invasive plant, and then think of what genetic characteristics make it that way, Callery pear has all of those. It's kind of the ideal, perfectly made genetic plant because of or invasive plant because of how it is. And I mean, this is boiled down. We knew this 100 years ago. Callery pear grows anywhere. That's what all this matters. And there's a good little blurb here in one of the letters about just you can find it growing in every different type of area. Sometimes as a tree, sometimes as a shrub, in the burning sun, in the shade, in the dry, and the wet. It grows all over the place. And even horse pastures here. This is one of these places. You'd think a pasture that's regularly grazed would be sort of immune, but it is not. We got called out here because this little horse kept getting its face just completely shredded up from these Callery pear trees. The owner would mow them and then did not know to spray them afterwards, so they would resprout. And then as we looked around, we had these great big two huge mother trees just right at the edge of the pasture there. So every year there's more seeds getting put in there from birds eating. We know that this stuff will go super fast. This is Alex. She is not very tall. But that being said, this is about 7 feet of growth in 1 year in one Callery pear. Okay, so it's got great potential from a genetic perspective. It grows incredibly fast. I mentioned birds before. This is a road I drive by every week for one of my kids' baseball things. You see right here, you've got a whole row of Bradford pear trees by this house. And over here is where basically the bird fly zone. So the birds will be on those pear trees, eating those fruits, fly across the road and fly over here. Poop, seeds get planted, and there they go. And so it looks like they're very little. This is a few years ago. I drove by it just yesterday and checked it out on Google Earth. And you can see now everything is still there, right? The Bradford pears are still there, blooming. And then you've got all these other pear trees, and they're much, much larger. The only reason they haven't spread more into that corner is because that area gets mowed regularly. So he keeps everything kind of at bay there. So they spread very easily from animals, mostly birds. But again, some of the fruits can be almost ping pong ball sized. Deer will eat those, raccoons will eat those, possums will eat those, skunks probably might eat those, who knows. The Callery pear canopy is super thick. Not a lot of light gets in there, and really not much grows underneath a grove of Callery pear. Once they get started, it makes kind of a dead zone underneath there. So what happens biologically under there, we don't really know yet, but we know nothing grows underneath it. And really, there's no ecological value for a Bradford or a Callery pear for that matter. One of the things that I think sometimes we forget about, and maybe not, since there's a little bird tie into this episode, most birds feed their young insects. Okay, so insects are super critical. Thousands of caterpillars are needed to raise a clutch of just little tiny chickadees or tiny little birds, right? And there's been a lot of really great work done that looks at the relationship between non-native plants and insects, right? So some of this work by Desiree Narango showed that as you have areas, this was in urban areas with more non-native plants, you actually have fewer baby birds because there's just not enough insects to support those birds. So where you have lots of Bradfords and Callery pears, not a lot eats that stuff. Does it affect the decomposers? We don't know. Again, the ecological impacts, and we'll get into some of the other impacts for sure, but ecologically, it may, right? We've got a big twig study that's still going on. We looked at, will things impact what kind of decomposes that wood? It's kind of in the middle. Some stuff is worse and some stuff is better in terms of fostering a good decomposer community. But without a decomposer community, stuff just sits there, right? And we need those communities to be able to sort of keep these processes going. And Clayton's been working diligently on this. We've done twigs. Now we're using some larger logs. So hopefully we'll figure some of this out really soon. And then the management stuff. And this is where we get most of our questions. Tractor tires can be easily popped. There's a great shot of a Callery pear thorn from the inside of a tire, right? So it is not cheap if you have to fix a tractor tire. That's not something you just get out there with a wrench and some lug nuts, right? That's got to go to the shop. So it's a big deal if this gets hit. We know the time and resources and money to control these things can be significant, absolutely. So then the question often comes back to me, is there anything good about this tree? Okay. And I thought about this long and hard, and there are some things out there, right? So there's this webpage in defense of Bradford pear, and they show that, some fruit growers dig up wild Callery pears. And I'm reading this, and I'm thinking, yes, dig them up. That is awesome. But then I learned only to graft on fruit-bearing cultivars, because again, that Callery pear rootstock is so strong. And if you look on this actual picture right down there on the left, branches of the Callery pear that they did not trim off, those will make flowers. They can receive pollen from those other from the things that was grafted on, and then those branches will be able to make viable seed. So I think, in some cases, when people keep the Callery sprouts 100% gone, that can work. Dave, does this have commercial value as a landscape tree? I mean, we have no idea at this point on annual sales. You can buy these things all over the place online. You can still get them at big box stores. So they're out there and people are buying them. And is there anything good about this tree? I will give you about 3 things. Okay, they photosynthesize. Got it, I admit that. They do provide structure and cover for things. They're occasionally used for nests and food storage. But I would ask, does the good of these things outweigh the bad of what that tree does ecologically and management wise? I think it's a hard no. I think it's a hard no. And I think at this point in time, with all the Callery pear on the landscape, anyone that plants a flowering pear cultivar and says, well, my tree won't do anything, that's just not right, right? There's so much wild pollen out there that if you plant a cultivar, even in isolation, it's going to have viable seeds on it because there's just too much out there. So getting back, is there anything good about this tree? No. There's nothing good about this tree that makes it worth keeping, in my opinion. Okay, so off the soapbox. So now what do we do, right? We know this tree is everywhere. It'll never be eradicated from the continent. So we're kind of down to a management on the local level. And how do we manage Callery pear at a local scale? This is kind of the meat of everything right now. So we got to figure this out. When you have invasive plants, there's a number of ways you can go about getting rid of those invasive plants. You can hand pull things, easy enough. Can you hand pull Callery pear? You know, maybe the little tiny seedlings you can do. And we hear people that'll say they have little seedlings sprouting up. And if it is a true seedling, yeah, you can pull that out. But a lot of times you're going to get thousands of these things. Can you girdle it alone? Like just girdle around that tree, cut that phloem. That's just going to cause a resprout, right? And we've even seen times where we've cut trees down and they've hit the ground, and then all of a sudden you've got buds on top of the tree will sprout, buds below will root, and all of a sudden you've got a row of Callery pears growing from this old stem. So if you can cut it down, that's great. Great. Bon Jovi once said, you're halfway there, right? If you don't use herbicide, then you're just basically making more Callery pears by just girdling it without herbicide. Grazing is a real common thing we see now. You know, can you use the chew crew and goats and that type of thing? This works great on things like kudzu and some of these other vines and some of these other plants. I don't think it's ever been tried for Callery pear. I doubt it would work. It would probably only work on trees before the hard thorns set in, which gives you a couple, 3 months in the spring. I don't think people have tried it, but I highly doubt this would work. Another plant control option is mechanical or cultural control, probably more common for something like bamboo. I don't think you're going to put a physical barrier in there. Can you dig out a Callery pear? Of course you can, any tree, as long as you get most of those big roots or grind that stump down, that is going to kill that thing. And that's going to take care of it. And yeah, this works sometimes, and in some cases it is the way to go. But this is not a cheap option. And again, you're limited in kind of where you can actually do this type of thing. Mowing works, but again, after a few months, the thorns on those Callery pear are going to get hard enough to puncture that tire. From a resprouted Callery pear, the thorns start out a little bit flexible, but they harden up and become woody really quick. So unless you're mowing 2, maybe 3 times a year, that's going to get out of hand really, really quickly. Prescribed fire is something we use for a lot of different forestry management techniques and tactics. We're working on this, right? I think it depends on if you can use fire as a component of Callery pear work. For seeds and fruit, it might work, right? So we know that a similar invasive species, Russian olive, they found that this was some work done out west, that if there's the hotter the fire, the more of those seeds did not germinate, right? So hot fire will stop seeds from germinate, kill them. It will also kill some of those smaller seedlings. So yeah, hot fire might work to reduce the amount of these things that grow from seed. Saplings, probably not. Right? There's been a few studies now. In this case, it looked at how much, how many sprouts were there before the fire and after the fire. And I'll tell you, the take-home message here is that burning Callery pear essentially just makes it angry, and it's going to send a whole bunch of sprouts up. So fire just makes it send up 3 to 4 sprouts. This was the study they looked at both burning and freezing and cutting only. And you can see when you cut it and let it come back, you've got what, 10-ish, 12-ish sprouts per, about that for burning, freezing slightly less. Really the only thing that makes it not resprout, herbicide. Herbicide, that last bar right there. And then this is a shot from one of our study plots in Georgia, where we looked at places where we'd done a prescribed fire and we identified those Callery pear. We had anywhere between 2 and 12 resprouts per sapling where the fire burned over a Callery pear. So sure, it top killed it, but it makes it like this. Now, that said, we'll come back to this. This is a great stage of the plant to use herbicide on, right? You've caused it to reflush, put a lot of energy into that new leafy growth. Great foliar herbicide. We'll come back to this in a second. So is burning going to work on mature trees though? Probably not, right? No one's tried it, but usually once that bark gets kind of woody and corky, it's tough to get a fire to go through there unless it gets up into the canopy. And let's be honest, nobody wants a canopy fire. So probably not going to work for mature trees. Biocontrol is thrown out a lot for invasive plant control. And in some cases, it works great, right? In some cases, it does work great. What about for Callery pear though? Okay, I think this is the best GIF I can describe to use my thoughts on Callery pear biocontrol. It's just not going to happen. And I mean, we've got data out there that shows how few things eat Callery pear, right? I mean, just nothing really eats Callery pear. Now, this was done in Delaware, which is quite a bit farther north than Georgia, South Carolina. We thought, well, what about down here? Maybe down here in the deep south, there is an option. So I keep track of everything I see eating Callery pear when I'm out and about. I've seen aphids on there, certainly not going to kill it. I've seen thrips probably. I've seen a bagworm here and there, and that is it. You just don't see a lot naturally eating Callery pear on the landscape. Then we just thought, well, does anything eat it, period, right? And so we did a study a few years ago where we looked at 3 very, very generalist insects: ball webworm, eastern tent caterpillar, and Japanese beetle. We know they'll eat almost anything. And we did a few large assays, and we looked to see, will they eat it? Honestly, not really. And in the case of, we also tested red maple, mocker nut hickory, and black cherry. For most Callery pear assays, the things would take a few nibbles and just die rather than eating it. So when you have insects that eat almost anything and you put them on Callery pear and they would rather die than eat it, that tells you something about the palatability of that particular species, which leaves us to herbicide. Is herbicide an option for Callery pear? And I would say it absolutely is. And it is the honestly, probably the only real effective management method we have. And we've done some trials in South Carolina, Georgia. We looked at what we called smaller trees, and these are about 6 feet tall or so. This is one of our study sites. Here's the other. So kind of an early field invasion. And what we ended up finding was almost everything works. Glyphosate works. Triclopyr works. Hexazinone works pretty well. As long as you've got the right, for some of these soil applied things, you've got to have rainfall at a particular time, but things are working. Imazapyr works great too. Like, all these things work. You can kill Callery pear. And then we kind of bumped up to trees that were a little bit larger after that, added some sites in Kansas. Here's Ryan with a couple Callery pears. He did a hack and squirt there. And so we called these our medium tree trials. And same thing, right? We're doing different application types. And what we found was, yeah, you can kill Callery pear with herbicides pretty easy. Cut stump worked all the time, right? When you cut that tree at the stump and then paint on a concentrated herbicide, it kills it every single time. We found that hack and squirt almost with glyphosated triclopyr worked almost every single time. We had a couple stragglers that just somehow hung on. Imazapyr, a little more variable. And then we found the soil application of hexazinone really depended on if you got the right rainfall following. So you've got to have sort of a rainfall thing there. But the take-home message is those things work, right? Herbicides work. You just have to put them on in the right way at the right time. So putting all this together, and I wanted to keep some time for questions, we know Callery pear is aggressive, prolific, and it's here to stay, right? So we're at the point where you can manage it in tracts of land on certain property in certain situations, but short of some sort of massive, I would say, microbial widespread outbreak of some sort of Callery pear disease, it's always going to be here. We just have to deal with it at that point. Herbicide is probably the cheapest option in terms of fighting Callery pear and getting it rid of your land. Fire, we're still working on, but it's likely that a combination will work pretty well if you have a place you can burn. Burning is going to top kill that stuff, promote a lot of fresh regrowth, and that fresh regrowth is just perfect for foliar application. Plus, then it's going to be small enough to where you can walk or drive over it. And you don't have to spray up over your head, which you shouldn't do anyway. Physically removing it works, of course, very expensive, right? But it is an option. And so that kind of leads us to regulatory action. You know, some states have actually banned the sale of Bradford pear or Pyrus calleriana. Ohio has done that. South Carolina has done that. Some other states are working on that too. So there's different ways to try to deal with this problem. It's stopping new things from being planted. And there's lots of, you know, people say, how can you tell me what to plant? Look, there's lots of great native species that can go in that spot that are pretty in the spring, pretty in the fall. There's lots of options. And then also figuring out what are some of the things we can do on the back end to get rid of it once it's in there. So with that being said, I am happy to take questions. Renee, Billy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Love that presentation. Yes.
I learned so much on that.
Thanks,
Oh,
man. Yeah,
man. Yeah.
Yeah,
Fascinating. And
Yeah,
still
we do have-
scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Taking over.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I try to remind people that look at. It looks scary, but it can be you can get rid of it. It takes effort. It takes time and effort. And you know, we stress if you're going to put out those herbicides, obviously follow label directions, labels of law, be safe, all of that. But timing is also really, really, really important. Anything you're going to put on a stem, whether it's cut stump or hack and squirt or a basal bark, and that's a technique I didn't talk about, but if you can scrape the bark of that tree, usually young trees, and see a little bit of green, that means stuff will still soak into that bark. And that is a time when you can apply certain things just to the stem. You just spray the bottom 1.5 foot of stem, soaks in, goes down, kills the roots. These things work great, but they have to be done basically late summer into fall and winter, because if you try to do it right now, if you think about what a tree is doing right now, is it's taking all of its energy from its roots and it's pushing everything up, right? We're pushing all that energy up to make flowers and make leaves. If you try to put something in a tree stem right now, it's just going to get pushed up and out, and it's not going to work, right? So as long as people are doing some of these herbicide techniques at the right time, you know, spring is not a good time to put herbicides on because all trees are shoving everything upwards. So foliar, you can start as soon as it's fully leafed out. You know, down here, it's going to be April-ish, late April, May works, probably maybe a little later for y'all. As long as the full canopy foliar works and anything on the stem, kind of wait till later in the season.
Well, right now they could get out there and mark all these trees, right?
Right.
You know,
This is the best, yeah.
and go find them. Look for the white out in your property and mark it down so you can get it later.
Right.
Yeah, and this is exactly what we did. We've got a few on our university golf course, and we went out and mark them now, come back later and take care of them. It's a lot easier to see them right now, obviously, because they're just completely obvious.
Right.
You know, we just wish we'd had this knowledge years ago, right?
Oh man, that old hindsight.
I know we're good at that. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, we do have several questions. So one person wanted to know if a pear crosses with an orchard pear tree that produces edible fruit, could the offspring have more typical pear size edible pears?
I've never seen that on a Callery pear, regardless of what it's crossed with. I think it just doesn't produce edible fruits. I mean, don't get me wrong, anything's edible once, right? But I mean, these things are they're very hard typically, and then come fall they get just mushy. I've not eaten one. You couldn't pay me enough to try, but I don't think that is how that particular species operates. I don't think you're going to get an edible pear off a Calleriana.
Will crossbow or any broadleaf herbicide work so not to do a total kill?
Meaning not to kill grasses underneath, I assume is what that's meant. I think, you know, I'm rusty on my trade names. So I would say if it's glyphosate, that works. That's going to kill everything, right? Triclopyr typically only hits the woody things, but it'll kill all the woody things. Something like imazapyr, that's your brown earth and that thing. You're starting over, right? So I would say look at those active ingredients to tell you what will and won't be susceptible. Some of these things like metsulfuron works on hardwoods, not so much pines, but some of these things will go and move through the soil as well. So I would just, my sort of blanket statement is really know what you're putting down and know what its effects are. Because if you've got a bunch of Callery pears by some really nice oaks you want to keep, you got to be careful there for sure.
And someone would like to know if you could recommend a white blooming tree to replace maybe their pear tree with.
Well, dogwoods are the kind of the classic response, right? Dogwoods are great. Depending on, you'll have emerald ash borer a lot up there. I still think fringe trees, white fringe trees are good. And I know they have been identified as a host for emerald ash borer, but I firmly believe that only happened because EAB populations where that study went down were sky high. I think at this point, EAB populations throughout much of the Southeast are low enough to where they'll prefer white fringe tree Chiananthus. They're not out there like looking for it. I don't know. In South Carolina, Georgia, I recommend white fringe tree. I don't think they're going to get hit because the EAB is just looking for ash. Serviceberry, I see, is another one that just popped up there in the chat. So there are some good options. The other, on that note, a lot of times people love the bright red foliage you get from Bradford pears in the fall. Black gum is awesome. Obviously, some of the maples are great. So there's good options there too for some of those.
Someone recommended using a tractor to pull it out. It would be the best.
Yeah, I guess, do you have to get all the roots, or if you leave any of those lateral roots, do they have a tendency to sprout back if you're like pulling it out,
Yeah, they do. And, one thing we'd like to look at is how big of a root will still sprout back. A lot of times, so the benefits to using some of those herbicides is it will kill all those roots. If you just pop that thing up, there's still a chance that some of those larger structural coarse roots are going to resprout. Kind of depends on how close they are to the soil surface. But yeah, a lot of them will resprout. Now, I will say, from what I understand, people that grind the stump down, they typically don't have a lot of resprouting. I think they get enough of the big roots to where the ones that are left just don't have the juice to do that type of thing.
All right. So if you are pulling them out, you might want to double check, later to make sure you didn't get any sprouting in those spots for sure.
Right.
We have an aristocrat pear in our backyard, and
Ah!
I know. Oh, and I was told to plant that, believe it or not, but that was like 25 years ago.
Yeah.
But it root sprouts all the time. I'm constantly cutting the root, the trees sprouting everywhere, and it's driving me crazy.
Yeah.
I had to get you some of that herbicide, Renee.
I know, right?
There you go.
I know. All right. I think we've answered all the questions. Thank you so much.
Oh, that was awesome. That
It was
really
an awesome
was.
presentation. Yeah.
You did such a good job. We're going to have you back. Okay.
All right. Hey, I'm happy to do it. Always happy to do it. And, I'm not hard to find. If people have questions, I'm happy to help. And, I think at the end of the day, it's taking care of whatever chunk of land you're able to take care of, and like I said, you can get rid of this stuff. It just takes a little bit of effort. But then once you've gotten the first wave of it gone, then you're just kind of spot treating after that. So it's always, for any invasive, as y'all talked about, that first passover is the hardest and the most, intense in terms of effort, cost, all of the things. But once you get that, and if you can just, stick on it, you'll have some success.
All right. Well, thank you so very much.
Yeah, it was really good. Enjoyed that.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for helping us out here in Kentucky. Appreciate it, Dr.
Definitely.
You bet. Take care.
All right. Good having you.
Awesome.
Really
Loved it.
good show today.
Yes.
It's always great having Dr. Crocker, and while sapsuckers, a lot of people might like looking at them, they can cause some issues
A
for
little
you.
bit. Yeah. A little bit. Yeah.
But we learned so much about the Callery pear and some of the challenges with it, and fortunately, it's easy to treat, right? But you got to find them and get them. So get out there and find them right now. Big thanks.
Right now, you can find them everywhere.
Yeah, so Dr. Coyle from Clemson did such a great job. Really appreciate having him on. But we thank you all for being with us each and every week. We do this show to try to help serve the landowners and those natural resource professionals that serve them here in Kentucky. So if you ever have questions from a forestry wildlife standpoint, let us know, because there's a good chance somebody else has those questions and we can help them learn as well. So let us know what you'd like to see.
And all of these will be on FromTheWoodsToday.com. Every show we've ever done, I think there's over 200 episodes, is on that website. So if you just go to FromTheWoodsToday.com, there's a little survey on there too. If you find something in your woods that you're just like, ooh, I don't know what that is, take a picture, send it to us. Also, right after this program, once you X out of Zoom, there'll be some questions there. If you don't mind answering those, especially at the end, if you don't get any show notifications, just put your email in there and we will add you to that to make sure you know what's going on From the Woods Today.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, let us know, folks. Then again, thank you all for being with us, and thanks for your interest in trying to be good stewards and helping other landowners be good stewards. We're all in this together, and the more we work together and help each other, the better off we'll all be.
Definitely. Until then, take care. Bye.
Take care, everyone.
From the woods today. From the woods today.